recognise, particularly after the event has passed. So let me ask you this. Do you talk about risk? Do you talk about risk sometimes? Do you talk about risk never? Or do you talk about risk once a risk has passed? And I've got to say, for me, historically, probably talking about risk is probably one notch up from sort of planning for a funeral or something like that. It's not the thing that really occupies the dinner conversation that I would want to participate in. So let's just think for a moment. What is risk? And to me, I think it's actually the probability of some sort of detrimental events. And so we subconsciously are faced with risks throughout the course of the day. So you got up this morning, you probably walked somewhere, you crossed the road, and there was an element of risk, and subconsciously we've been programmed that we actually calculate the risk. How far is the car moving? How fast is the car moving? Is there someone likely to come out from around that corner? And we deal with it and we move forward. To my way of thinking, a crisis or a disaster is actually when we start to lose control of managing the risk. And so some of the risks that I would throw up there are environmental. So there's the earthquake in Christchurch. We've had floods, cyclones. I would throw up legal. And when I mean legal, if you really think about the essence of a contract is typically around managing some sort of risk in terms of the performance of other parties. And so that's a risk to a business, depending on the scope and scale of the contracts. Financial risk. You only need to ask anyone that's based in Europe about what financial risk looks like from an exchange rate standpoint. There is a huge element of risk right there. Regulatory risk. Think about what we've just seen in the last week from the Live Meat Exporters Association. All of a sudden, there are a whole lot of people involved in that value chain, and their businesses are thrown upside down immediately. Cash flows stop. Backlogs start to build up. Resources are all of a sudden scarce. So that's another element of risk. And then we've got security. We've talked about the E. coli situation in Europe. Media risk. Just rewind a year and think about WikiLeaks. Think about where the United States was positioned on that issue as it broke. There was the immediacy of sort of the self-preservation. There's no risk to the United States. We haven't got an issue. We're in complete denial that anything's going on at all. And then all of a sudden there was this huge backlash from the media and the general population towards Hillary Clinton, and her own brand was at stake in terms of how she was actually going to deal with it, because she was the one facing the media saying, we don't have a problem. But they did. And so some of those examples will weave back into what might we do differently from a leadership standpoint. What does success look like? I would say that the poster children of success right now, at least the visible ones that we would see, would probably be Anna Bligh for her efforts around the flood, and Bob Parker in New Zealand for the Mayor of Christchurch for fronting the media. But I'm also quite conscious of leadership of an organisation doesn't look like that for most of us. It's far less public, it's far more practical, and they are also well supported by very large organisations that have a public interest. One of the things that I would say is a really overarching theme around managing a disaster, managing a crisis, is speed. And no doubt where media are involved and where there's a high element of risk around human life, speed is absolutely critical. But speed doesn't always mean faster. And I'll get to that a little bit later, just in terms of how you think about decision-making potentially in the heat of the moment, and actually how we balance what needs to happen in what sequence. Let me just take you to an example. And I'm going to paint a picture, but come on a journey with me. Let's step out of the room and let's zoom off to Africa. And we're going to turn up, and we're in a small, very, very poor township. It's very hot, it's dry, wind is blowing, it's very, very dusty. There's 30,000 people in this community cramped into the tiniest spaces you can imagine. Houses are 3 metres by 4 metres. They're made out of used materials, rusty iron, broken pieces of timber, loads of kids running around on the streets, rubble on the streets, piles of rubbish, broken down cars, all sorts of congestion, laneways closed up because people have just left debris in the way. We're way outside our comfort zone, right? Most of us are not familiar with those circumstances. I'm certainly not. And so culturally it's foreign. Language is a barrier. All of a sudden we know we're not comfortable. We know there's certain risks with where we're going, what we're doing. But play along with me for a second, because they asked me to come to it with an example, and this is the example I would have because I think it tells us something about our human behaviour in the event of a disaster or a crisis. We're now inside a public facility in Africa in this environment, and we're dealing with underprivileged children. There's orphans, there's lots of them that are typically preschool age, and we're there as a family. I was there as a family. So my wife is there, my 4 children are there, and we're working with these children. And we're alert to security, we're alert to making sure we haven't got lots of cash, cameras, those sorts of things. But then all of a sudden, we look out the window and become acutely aware that the smouldering fires that are typically burning rubbish is not the smoke that we see out the window. All of a sudden, a fire has broken out and there's billowing smoke. And the wind is blowing strong and there's all sorts of noise and chaos starting to build. And I'd look at that and say, you know what, this is a crisis. This is a crisis for the people that are right in that moment of terror of their houses burning down. And we're in an environment where fire engines can't get in, where all of a sudden this is dry and there's rubbish and it's starting to spread through the community. And so I kind of started to examine and said, well, what do we do in that situation? So first of all, Time? All right. Let me cut to the chase. We started to communicate. We had to think about the safety of the children that we had with us, ours and others. We had to assess all of the other options that we had, and we actually devised a plan of actually how we were going to go through that. When we reflected later, we started to think about what was the impact on that community, what else could we be doing. But the interesting thing was there was all sorts of looting, there was all sorts of crazy human behaviour in the heat of the moment. There were people running towards this thing to go and see it, almost with the excitement of the moment. It was almost like the onlookers that I'm assuming were there at the Christchurch earthquake. So let's keep going. My point of all of this is we didn't have a plan. We did not have a plan. So planning is actually point number 5. It's the first one I'm talking about. But if at the moment that the crisis happens, you're starting to think about a plan, you've actually missed an opportunity. Step 1 is actually start to assess, scope out what's going on, understand the weather forecasts that were culminating into a flood or a cyclone. First priority is talk with your organisation about the preservation of life. And we've been in situations where that has been a real threat. We've got to think about the protection of lives. Lives count. Then it's safety, and then I think it's about the survival of the enterprise. And so there is a priority or a hierarchy of needs that need to be thought through. Communication, I talk about it in the context of building clarity and confidence. And so one of the things that you need to think about is who are the internal stakeholders that you actually want to have intimately involved in this? Who are the external stakeholders? And the list is there for you to read for yourself. Clarify decision-making and commitments. So if I break this down to the example when the floods hit here in Queensland, we set up an expectation, and that was at 10 a.m. every morning we would have an open conference call internally in the organisation. And the reason why we did that is it was a way for us to disseminate intelligence that we had about what was going on. It was a way for people around different parts of the country to think about or to understand what was going on. So they didn't need to be pestering people on an hourly basis saying what's going on in Brisbane. And we also wanted to make sure that the organisation was clear of we are making decisions, but we will make the appropriate decisions at the appropriate time. And so another example would be the cyclones. The great temptation, particularly with a sales organisation, is they want to make commitments to customers. But at the moment that a cyclone happens, we have no idea whether we're truly going to be able to honour the commitments that we might be making as an organisation. So I think it's around clarifying what are the things that you're doing and when are you doing them. Point number 3, execute. And what I mean by that is actually let the people that are in that space deal with the things that they need to deal with. I worked in a very large organisation, and when hurricanes would hit Latin America, the immediate thing is they wanted to get out and make a media statement, they wanted to brief directors, and they wanted to have some sort of communication with shareholders. But the point was, the people that were going to prepare that information actually had to deal with the immediacy of a whole lot of things very, very